Hello there, fearfully and wonderfully made human, and welcome back to another episode of the Holistic Counselor Podcast. It's me, Diana Rice from Through the Valley Therapy and Transform Mind Consulting and Coaching. Today, we're opening up a conversation around something that so many people quietly struggle with, but don't always have the language for. We'll be exploring intrusive thoughts, OCD, anxiety, phobias, and that feeling of being stuck in your own mind, like you just can't turn it off. Maybe you've had a thought that scared you. Maybe you found yourself going over the same thing again and again. Maybe you've wondered, why can't I stop thinking about this? Or even, what does this say about me? If you've ever asked yourself, do I have OCD? Why can't I stop these thoughts? Or is this anxiety or something more? This conversation is for you. And here's something important to hold on to as we begin. You are not alone, and you are not your thoughts. Today is really just a conversation. We're going to explore, we're going to learn, and we're going to get curious together about what may be happening in the brain when it comes to fear, anxiety, and obsessive thinking patterns. We may also touch on something called exposure and response prevention, or ERP, which is one of the main approaches used to treat OCD and anxiety. If you've ever felt trapped in cycles of fear, avoidance, or rumination, parts of this conversation may really resonate with you. So, whether you're someone who struggles with intrusive thoughts, health anxiety, phobias, or even just feeling stuck, I want you to lean in and just listen. Take what is helpful and leave the rest. Today, I am joined by Meghan Cromie, a licensed mental health counselor, anxiety specialist, and the founder of Still Mind Psychology in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Meghan specializes in treating OCD, anxiety disorders, phobias, and trauma using evidence-based approaches, especially exposure and response prevention. She has over 6 years of experience working specifically with OCD and has helped teens and adults move beyond cycles of fear and intrusive thoughts into lasting recovery and confidence. Meghan earned her bachelor's degree in psychology with honors from New College of Florida and her master's degree in marriage and family therapy from the University of Central Florida. She is licensed in multiple states and works both in person and virtually. Meghan, thanks for being here.
Absolutely, Diana. I'm excited to be on and I'm excited to have this conversation with you.
Yeah. Well, before we even start, what states are you licensed in besides Florida?
Yes, yeah, I'm in Florida,
Uh-huh.
Texas, Vermont, Idaho, and South Carolina.
Wow. Wow. Good for you. I mean, I'm still trying to figure out if this counseling compact is ever going to happen.
Yeah, no comment on that. I got so excited this year because there were one or two more states I had wanted to get licensed in, but I'm like, I'm just gonna wait for the compact, and here I am waiting,
Yeah, I think we're
six
all
months
are.
later, and yeah, I have no clue when that's gonna hit for us here in Florida, but hopefully soon because I
Yeah.
would love to do more states actually, but I think I'm gonna put a pause because it is a lot
Yeah.
now.
Well, and for anyone listening that's an intern or in our field and is curious, I'll put, if you don't know what I'm talking about, the counseling compact, I'll put a link in the show notes so you guys could figure that out for yourselves too, as we're all trying to figure it out. Anyway, what led you to treating OCD, intrusive thoughts and anxiety, and what were the some of the things in your life or training that made you really passionate? Because sometimes we, as professional therapists, we start off generalized, of course, and then all of a sudden we niche down because of for a reason. So, what's your story?
Yeah, so, you know, like many therapists, it started a little bit with what I had gone through, although it's a little unique in how I actually kind of ended up more in the OCD realm. So, growing up, I actually was someone who, even just from a really young age, consistently struggled with really intense social anxiety. And
Wow.
as I got older, it actually kind of got worse almost in my teenage years, as it does for many. Just, you're expected to kind of be going out on your own socially a lot more. And for me, it kind of developed then from anxiety into, really this idea of like getting panicked and eventually more agoraphobia. So I was always fairly functioning with it in that I could always leave the house, go to work or school, but it just got to the point for me where anything that wasn't kind of in that necessary routine would just trigger immense panic, panic attacks, fear. I'd be crying at the idea of like gonna go like pick up takeout for my family by myself. So it was something I had dealt with and really had to work to overcome very significantly, especially as I kind of like left home and went out to college, and all of the safety behaviors that I had as a teenager were really no longer possible. So I had to slowly but surely really get out of my shell and work through that with kind of self-guided exposure therapy at the time because I didn't necessarily have access to therapy at that young age. And so going into my practice, it was something that as I had really started overcoming it, it was just so passionate to me. And so I really, especially once I was able to start working more for like a group practice after, well, it was still during my internship, but I really wanted to actually work with panic disorder and agoraphobia because it was so special to me.
Yeah.
Of course, it really still is. However, what I actually noticed was that so many people, because I was saying that and like wanting to help people with agoraphobia, I realized about 75% of the people who were coming to me for agoraphobia
Yeah.
actually had OCD. And so it was
Ah.
something at first I kind of stumbled into. I didn't
Hmm.
kind of understand at first because I was, a lot more familiar with the anxiety and panic realm. Um, and so when people were coming in for more of these concerns of, yes, I also can't leave the house, but for me, it's because of this intense fear of contamination or getting sick, or what if I harm someone, or what if I make mistakes while I'm out? And so
Hmm.
I realized because a lot of times information on OCD was so limited, so
Right.
scant, especially back then, that these were people coming in completely unaware. A lot of times they truly had OCD, or even if they did, for them, they understood it as agoraphobia. So as part of that, I actually really had to kind of figure it out and start learning about it because it was such a big part of the clients who were actually coming into me. Luckily, of course, right, like I was already trained in exposure therapy, so I kind of
Yeah.
already had a lot of the tools. And luckily, at the time, the group practice owner I was working with, she actually was an OCD specialist, so she was really helpful in guiding me kind of towards learning more about it and getting additional training and kind of figuring out how to conceptualize these cases and kind of
Mhm.
grow more. So it became something I just started almost taking on accident, especially when I had really started in private practice. It was basically right after the pandemic had ended, quote
Yeah,
unquote.
no, for real. And
So
that
yeah.
social anxiety, I see it in some of my clients. Well, before we even continue, I want, if somebody has no idea what the word agoraphobia means, can you explain that a little more, please?
Yeah, so the full name for the diagnosis is panic disorder with agoraphobia. So it is primarily a panic disorder presentation, which means you get incredibly nervous and fearful about the idea of potentially getting panicked or having a panic attack in public. It's usually tied to this idea of intense embarrassment that could happen from having these panic attacks while you're out and about. But it could also be tied into the idea of danger that could happen. So, for example, a lot of times it's really bad in like enclosed spaces or especially while driving because it becomes this fear of what if I have a panic attack while I'm driving my car? What if I have a panic
Wow.
attack while I'm out with my kids and now I can't take care of them? So it can spawn into a lot of different flavors, but the core of it is essentially a fear of getting panicked. And that eventually, like most anxiety disorders of this type and very similar to OCD, over time, if left untreated and if we continue to kind of really fall down that rabbit hole, tends to lead to people's lives becoming smaller and smaller because you avoid these things that bring you panic. And so with agoraphobia, because being out in public is the trigger, right? Of, well, if I get panicked, people will see me and that's going to lead to all these issues. It can eventually become this part where we actually try to be out of the house as little as possible. So
Yeah.
usually we are staying home. You may be leaving the house only for absolutely required things like to go to work and go home, go to church and go back.
Yeah.
Um, so you may go out with like a safety person or things like that, but it becomes this really scary idea of at any point, the only place I'm really safe is at home, and any kind of like public activity or place where I could get panicked becomes a trigger. So that's kind of what agoraphobia looks like. So it's not necessarily a symptom, as in fear of leaving the house, although I do think that's how people commonly understand it to be. but it
Hmm.
is a specific category, like subdiagnosis of panic disorder. So it's not just I don't feel comfortable leaving the house. Traditionally, it is defined as I have a fear of developing panic attacks, which leads me to this intense avoidance. But like I said, because it is so commonly more associated with just generally people who have anxiety when they're
Hmm.
anywhere that's not home, a lot of times people can really relate to it and relate to those feelings and limitations, even if the core of the fear is more OCD related or trauma related or something else.
Yeah. I mean, it's like, how do you disentangle what is just a shy personality? You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Because that's the thing too. And I realize like working with adolescents a lot for most of my career and just where I come from and what I've seen and stuff like that. It's just like, how do you teach someone or like if you're working with a teenager and the parents are like, oh, they're just shy. We got to push them.
Yeah.
But you also want to not enable it either. And then all of a sudden, the child's stuck and they can't go to school or they can't talk. I mean, at all. And they have a lot of issues that end up showing up even more. How do you disentangle that?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question, and it's a fine line. Both with this, with OCD, you'll see it as well, which is how does a parent kind of balance being supportive without being enabling? Because you're absolutely right. A lot of times it comes out of this loving desire to help a child or a partner avoid anxiety, that in the long run, it creates this sort of dependence that actually makes the anxiety worse. So I don't know if there's any one perfect way. It kind of depends on the severity of things, right? So if
Yeah.
you have a child or a partner who's maybe like they definitely have some mild anxiety, encouraging them even just, like, hey, I believe in you. You should get out of your comfort zone, give it a try. Things like that oftentimes are just great ways we can still be supportive, which I understand it is anxiety producing, but maybe reminding them of why it's so important to them, right? Like, but you really want to start college, so it's important to kind of be going to class, right? Because this is part of your value system. Um, let's try doing it. And of course, if it's really difficult, maybe we slow it down. Maybe we kind of try inching you back into it. We don't have to do it all at once. So I think there's a lot of ways of like gently encouraging people and just
Hmm.
reminding them of, why it's so important and maybe normalizing how hard these things can be and normalizing that it is anxiety producing to do a lot of these things, right? To make new friends, to be in a new place, to go to a new school that everyone can relate, even if they don't have that intensity of it, with that diagnosis. All of us have had to overcome that fear to some extent. So I
Right.
think normalizing it, because a lot of times with agoraphobia or with OCD, it feels like, oh, I'm the only one who feels this way, and it's easy for everyone else. So kind of breaking that down and breaking that idea into like, no, of course, maybe sometimes it wasn't as hard for me because I don't have this disorder, but at its core, these are really human anxieties and elements. I will say what clinically oftentimes can help is if it's very severe, what we often do is
Hmm.
kind of a exposure hierarchy that is mirrored between support giver and
Hmm.
person. So for
Hmm.
example, if I'm working through my social anxiety or agoraphobia and the thing I'm working on is something like, oh, I'm going to be going on walks by myself and then I'm going to try to leave the house for 30 minutes, then I'm going to try to go to these places by myself, then I'm going to do this. Clinically, especially for children,
Hmm.
what we'll also do is come up with a separate hierarchy for the caregiver that we collaborate all together with, which
Hmm.
includes steps that support that. So,
Okay.
for example, that might be things like usually mom would walk the dog because daughter's too afraid to be outside by herself in the evenings because she's worried she's going to bump into people and she could get nervous about that. So, usually mom walks the dog every evening, maybe as daughter's working on the exposure of like I'm walking by myself, I'm getting out of the house for longer periods of time, and she's getting really good at that. The exposure hierarchy we would do for mom would be I'm going to only walk the dog 3 days a week. So the daughter now has to do it a few days a week
Okay.
by herself. So we can
Right.
together because sometimes that's really useful for pretty more like severe presentations. And it is the same with OCD, where it's the goal is kind of whatever you're working on,
Hmm.
the parent step would be then to kind of remove whatever accommodation or compulsion that they're engaging in to help you kind of like do that on your own, step by step by step. That's really useful when it is severe because there's so many triggers. And so
Yeah.
just generally being like, oh, like you got it, you go do it all 100% by yourself is not always actually doable.
No.
but it's designed to still do the same idea, right? Which is ultimately we want to be supportive and empathetic, but we want to foster that independence. Uh,
Okay. So before we even go to exposure therapy, I think we should touch on OCD because with TikTok people, I mean, and and everybody on social media and assuming, it's when you're on social media, I've come to find out and realize this is why I take big breaks. Like right now, I'm on a social media break, but it's, you have too much information to the brain. And I can imagine now with anxiety, depression, OCD, narcissism through the roof,
yeah.
right? But everybody has it and everybody's diagnosing everybody with all these things.
Yeah.
I mean, I've heard it and I've been guilty of saying I'm so OCD. And I literally have not gone to a psychologist who actually you have to be diagnosed to really have the disorder, right?
Yeah.
Because there's this OCD disorder, obsessive
Yes.
compulsive disorder. I want people that are listening that really have no idea because sometimes you gather information and you're like, oh, I have this. I have, you know how many people I know have died, and I go, where'd you get your diagnosis from? They're like, oh, I just watched a video.
Yep.
And I'm like, oh, okay then. And then we have to take a dive into that because honestly, it might not even be OCD at all. It could be something totally different.
Yes,
So,
absolutely. And I'm
so
with
can we
you. I
talk
think it's
about it?
always important to yeah,
Yeah.
a professional because I think a lot of times we get so caught up in the presentation of symptoms when the
Yes.
reality is so many mental health disorders and just so many parts of being human overlap. So you really have to dig deeper. It's not going to be this obvious thing on the surface that immediately you can be like, yep, I click that box, I do that thing, which means I have OCD. It's
Right.
unfortunately not that simple, but I am glad, I guess, overall there's more information out there compared to before. Yes, it's still important because there's so much and we don't always know. So OCD, I would say diagnostically is
Hmm.
relatively simple in that there's really only two criteria. You have to have obsessions and compulsions. But I will break that down because
Please.
theoretically simple, not simple in reality in
Hmm.
terms of diagnostically assessing. And
Right.
probably there's not enough research on this, but I would say, in my own clinical opinion, one of the most commonly missed diagnoses out there because it is much more common than we currently know because it's constantly just said as anxiety. So, two components, obsessions and compulsions. Obsessions would be repeated intrusive thoughts, essentially sticky thoughts that you simply can't stop thinking about. These are thoughts that are unintended, so we're not trying to necessarily think of something, but it keeps popping up in our mind. So, an intrusive thought is just any thought you are not purposely really bringing up that intrudes into your mind. So, it shows up there, usually in a distressing way.
Hmm.
Those thoughts can be and often are basically out of line with our personal values. So, what we call ego dystonic. They do not have to be, but the majority of them are. So, these are oftentimes images, thoughts, or sensations that we don't want to be there, that cause immense panic and distress, and oftentimes violate our own personal morals and values.
Mm.
So for example, there are sexual intrusive thoughts, there are thoughts related to harm, there are intrusive thoughts related to pedophilia, there are intrusive thoughts related to so many taboo topics
Yeah.
and things that obviously, if they kind of just show up in your mind, they become very scary and very distressing. There are still intrusive thoughts that just bad things could happen that aren't necessarily always completely not our values. So for example, contamination is considered one of those themes where the thoughts are often ego syntonic, which simply means they don't really violate our personal values, but they still cause a lot of distress. So the idea, oh, this thing could have some sort of like bacteria or virus on family sick, and because I'm someone who cares about that so much, that causes me so much fear and distress. So
Hmm.
they can really be either way, but essentially it's any set of intrusive thoughts that reoccur. So it's not a
Right.
one-time thought. You don't have OCD if you just get the occasional random intrusive
Right.
thought that pops up, and for most of us, they fade, right? We
Hmm.
might get an intrusive thought, but we quickly realize, oh, that's just a silly thought. I don't feel that way, and we move on, right?
Right.
A normal person, they'd get an intrusive thought, oh, having a terrible day at work. My boss really dug into me on this project. I'm so
Hmm.
upset about this. Oh my God, like I wish this place would just disappear and like blow up and I wouldn't have to go back to work tomorrow. Right? An
Right.
extreme thought that
Yeah.
3.99% of us would be like, you're just upset at your boss. You
Yeah.
don't want this whole place to disappear. You just are having a rough day. We need to go home and take a nap and relax and
Hmm.
hope tomorrow's a little better,
Hmm.
right? So typically these intrusive thoughts are pretty rare. They come and go. We don't read much into them. They fade. But with someone with OCD, the issue is when an intrusive thought pops up, they are a lot more likely to read meaning into it. So they
Hmm.
go, oh my God, I can't have that thought be in my head. What does that mean about me? What's wrong with me? And so it becomes something that really freaks them out. The
Hmm.
attention we give to those thoughts is actually what causes them to turn into obsessions, which is
Wow.
current intrusive thoughts. So instead of it being a one-time thing that really bugged me and scared me, it becomes the first thing I think of when I wake up, the thought
Yeah.
that just can't go away. So
Right.
that's the first main piece. These thoughts can be on any subject. So there is no set number of themes or obsessions for it to qualify as OCD. It simply has to be any thought or sensation that causes you immense distress and keeps recurring.
Hmm.
The second criteria is compulsions. Now, I really like talking to people about this. It's something I'm very passionate about, and I try to inform people on TikTok because one of the biggest misconceptions is that compulsions are only these physical acts that you feel like you have to do to make something better. A compulsion is any physical or mental act, and a lot of them are mental, um, that allows us to escape this distress in some way.
Hmm.
Usually, it's something we're doing that we feel like neutralizes this thought or prevents a fear from happening. So, for the most simple and commonly seen and diagnosed one would be something like contamination, where I have this fear that something actually is dirty or contaminated and could cause me or my loved ones to get sick, which means
Hmm.
the compulsion I'm going to do is I need to sanitize, need to use bleach, I need to wipe it multiple times.
Yeah.
And so that is the compulsion that pairs with it. The cleaning is designed to neutralize that fear from happening. But for every single obsession. There is no form of OCD that doesn't have compulsions. But what people often miss is that a lot of times they're doing mental compulsions. So these are invisible because they happen in your head. But these might be things like needing to reassure yourself that fear won't happen repeatedly,
Mm.
ruminating on the fear. So that might be trying to like logically solve it, or come up with all these ways where like, here's why it won't happen, researching it or replaying all of our memories to be more sure of something.
Hmm.
And again, these are repeated, not just one time, because all
Right.
of us do these things occasionally, but
Yeah.
someone with OCD is doing it all throughout the day.
Right.
Mentally strategizing. So they're coming up with these plans on like, if this happened, how would would I take my kids to the hospital if they got sick? What medicine would they give them? What would happen if they died? What would happen at the funeral? Would people judge me? Coming up with all of these kind of hypotheticals and plans for what they would have to do if it
Mhm.
occurred.
A lot of what ifs.
Yes,
What
OCD is
ifs.
kind of commonly called the doubting disorder. So it is
Wow.
tons of what if thoughts.
Yeah.
It's almost always more concerned with these hypotheticals than it
Hmm.
is like real in front of me life issues, right? It's
Right.
more about the doubt. In fact, a lot of people with OCD have clear insight, which is they're aware this is not super likely to happen. But the fact that it's possible feels so intense that it still feels like I have to do these compulsions to prevent even the possibility of this
Right.
happening.
Yeah, and I want to explain to the audience that if it's disturbing your play, your love, your relationship, you know what I mean, like normal living, then that is a issue that needs to be addressed because it will just keep getting worse and worse until you know what I mean, your whole body and system will finally be like, all right, this is enough and I'm in pain or I can't function or somebody's telling you like, okay, do you see this happening? And so I want people to understand, like, yeah, we have normal, like you said, like sometimes I think, I know it sounds crazy, but it does, where I'm like on the road, I'm like, I wonder what happened if I just go over the bridge,
Yep, exactly.
right? But it's
Yeah, sure.
creativity too, like in the mind, and you have
Yes.
to disentangle. I want to ask you about something because you know that I'm a counselor who works with a lot of faith-based, and what I have seen a lot now that I've had my private practice is those that come in and they don't even know what the word scrupulosity is, right? And that is a form of OCD where I want people to understand like healthy spiritual conviction.
Mhm.
And then you have that anxiety driven scrupulosity. And to me, that's just religious OCD. Can you explain that a little bit for my listeners? Because I have a lot of listeners who are Christians.
Yes, absolutely. So, religious OCD is just kind of a theme. It's not technically a different diagnosis of OCD, but it's just a common obsession people will get because OCD attacks what we value most, and religion is one of those things that people tend to have a lot of value with. Now,
Hmm.
I will say you can actually get religious themed OCD even if you do not personally identify as religious. So these types of thoughts can still come up because a lot of times people, even if they don't identify with it, there's
Hmm.
still big fears, and kind of worries someone might have about what happens next and, am I doing the right thing? But generally, religious OCD kind of involves repeated obsessions and intrusive thoughts about making some sort of religious mistake, error, not being kind of like morally and religiously correct in some way. A lot of the common presentations you'll see are things like needing to kind of repeatedly pray or make like perform religious rituals. So commonly that might be things like I have to be doing the sign of the cross anytime I get a bad thought. If I have any thought in my head that I feel is sinful or wrong, I need to do something about it to instantly make it go away, or else. A lot of perfectionism there. So a lot of times it's not just, oh, I have a prayer routine I like, but it's,
Hmm.
I have to say this prayer perfectly. And if I say even one word wrong, or if I have even a second where I have the wrong intention or thought as I pray, it's wrong, it's sinful, I need to stop. What if it makes something bad happen? I need to repeat.
Right. It's the health thing. Like I'm just going to be frank because it's like I've heard it. It's like, oh my goodness, if I don't do A, B, and C, I'm going to hell.
Yes, that's a
Yeah.
lot of times that's one of the big core fears is I'm going to hell or I'm disappointing God in some way or
Yeah.
I will be rebuked by my religious community for not being religious enough or in the right way. So it definitely tends to correlate around those general core themes.
Hmm.
Or like I'm not sure enough about what happens, which means instead of hell, maybe it's this idea of like, what if I'm in the wrong faith, and then because I did the wrong thing, I'm kind of stuck in this void of devoid of meaning in the afterlife. So a lot of religious OC, it tends to correlate around those specific core fears, and it does tend to have a lot of similar compulsions across people. So you'll definitely see general things like um, repetition of prayer, the need to perform repeated religious kind of like acts and rituals, repeatedly seeking reassurance, often from their community, pastor, priest, etc., and people in their life. The need to kind of be like ruminating constantly and asking themselves, "Am I religious enough? Was that wrong? Am I a good person?" Usually hyper avoidance. So a lot of times anything they perceive as sinful or wrong becomes this area where they need to pull themselves back from extremely to prevent even the wrong thought from entering their mind. Uh,
Hmm.
so those are a lot of the common compulsions. Of course, the presentation of it can vary a little bit because each person's religious practice is going to vary and, varies by community even. So you may see different versions of these types of compulsions across cultures, across different religious backgrounds. But a lot of times it just looks like these very like repeated mental and physical acts. Basically, where there's any concern, any fear pops up that I'm kind of being sinful, wrong, not religious enough in some way. And that causes
Right.
so much distress, so much fear that
Yes.
they're feeling like they're pushed, they're almost forced into doing these compulsions to correct it. So there's a huge preoccupation with kind of needing to achieve this almost like perfect level of spirituality, of religious practice that
Hmm.
if they fail to live up to makes them this terrible sinful person who's going to hell, who's going to be rebuked, kind of all of these really intense negative fears. Of course, granted, if you ask them that, they may not put it in that language, right? They're like, no, this is just how it should be, and if I'm not
Right.
doing that, it's that's what everyone's doing, right?
Right.
But that's typically that presentation. So it's not just having routine or
Hmm.
general spiritual practices, which I think many people have, right? Of like, oh, I like to say my prayer routine in the evening.
And we are routine. I mean, it helps to have a
Yes.
routine. It helps to, and so that's what I'm trying to get at is for people to understand like there is healthy conviction. There is healthy religion followings and healthy churches and synagogues and places to go, right? It's
Yes.
just it becomes unhealthy when you can't function in society in a way that is, helpful for you and for the other people in your life.
Yes. And I would say what I oftentimes use to help people understand that, because a lot of times, again, it's something people care about a lot. So the idea oftentimes people struggle with when they start treatment is I don't want to not do any of these things because they feel like part of my authentic spiritual practice and experience. And so part of what my job as a therapist to help them disentangle that a little bit and understand the difference between it.
Right.
Because while we all do have routines, we have practices, there's cultural practices a part of different churches, different religious practices, different ethnic groups, right? Like how we want to practice has ritual as a part of it. And so
Hmm.
to disentangle the ritual of compulsion from the ritual
Yes.
of culture and religion is important. What I often highlight for people is that it's a one way I like to help them reflect it is do you feel like you kind of have control over it? Because again, it's one thing to make a personal choice of something that feels authentic to you that helps you feel closer to, your higher power, your God,
Hmm.
versus if it feels like you have to do this or else you cannot possibly move on. You can't move on in the day, right? Because
Yeah.
no matter what the religion is, right? Like Christianity, especially, right? It's not about this idea of perfection. So much
Right.
of it is centered in this idea of empathy and forgiveness and maybe like striving, right, for, our general morals and principles.
Hmm.
It's really what these people struggle with is much farther from that, right? It's this extreme version in which they
Hmm.
actually lose a sense of control. So it becomes, are you actually praying because you truly feel this connection right now and you would like to kind of experience that and do it? Or do you feel like you have to right now?
Hmm.
Do you feel like if you don't do it, something bad's going to happen?
Right.
Because,
The axe is gonna fall down.
yeah, right. Like this is
Here
it. No,
comes
I'm damned
Old
right now in this
Testament
moment.
God, the cosmic
And
abuser
so
who's gonna come get you.
yes,
No,
it's a good way to help people
sorry, Lord,
differentiate.
that
Yeah, that it's
offended you.
it's
But it
not about this like, oh, I'm just choosing this. It's,
right.
but if you made a small mistake or some of these just normal human things,
Mm-hmm.
if there's an immense amount of fear and distress around that and a
Yeah.
feeling of like, I have to fix it or else,
Hmm.
it's a great point to kind of reflect that it's like, hey, you're actually losing the point of this, which is connection to your
And
spirituality
peace.
and peace,
Peace.
like really actually being authentic in the way you
Mhm.
pray
Right.
versus now you're performing this ritual in a specific way that isn't even usually mandated by your religion.
Hmm.
Like no one's telling you you have to say every single word perfectly or else like you're a terrible
Yeah.
person. But it becomes this I've lost almost control in it, right? That I
Yeah.
almost feel compelled to do it. And
Hmm.
the act of choice is no longer feeling like a big component. So that
Yeah.
that definitely helps people disentangle it. And of course, too, you can kind of just look at it as many mental health conditions in the DSM-R. If it varies significantly, right? So if
Mm.
most people in your church were like, yes, we're praying, we're performing these rites, we're doing these things, but you feel like your routines are in excess of that and to the point where you're panicked all the time, you're struggling to maintain relationships, you're struggling to get to work even because you're doing all these rituals in the morning, you're no longer functioning. And
Yes.
you're doing these rituals in excess of what any kind of person, even within your faith and culture, would probably really even recommend you to do. A lot of times these people, they're talking with their priest, their pastor, who's even saying, like, hey, you really don't need to do all of this.
Hmm.
You can tone it down. Your faith is not in jeopardy if you don't do these things.
Right.
Even that level of reassurance is oftentimes not enough.
Hmm.
Still becomes, but what if? But what
Yeah.
if
That what if?
this one prayer, making this one mistake, doing
Mm.
this one thing, letting this
Yeah.
one thought be here is enough. And so that's the difficult part is it's often far in excess of what is kind of considered standard even in that particular faith.
Yeah. So I want to know what you think about what's happening in the brain because I think a lot of people especially if they don't know,
Yeah.
right? Like we know these things because we studied them, we go and get educated, we have continuing education unit. These are, I'm not a niche OCD person, but I know anxiety, I mean, and I know depression. These are signals to me. They're signaling something in your body and you better pay attention. But could it be a physical thing that's happening, like you haven't gotten a nutrient, or is it because there was childhood abuse that you disassociated from and it's in your
Yeah.
subconscious. And now all of a sudden, oh, now I remember back when I was 8 years old, I got caught masturbating. And then my mom said, I'm going to hell. And we were raised in a very religious. And so now I'm constantly like, oh my gosh, but now I have sexual thoughts because I'm a teenager. It could
Yeah.
go, I'm sorry, I'm going into a rabbit hole. I literally just put like 5 clients in one statement that I had back when I worked with teenagers. But you know what I mean, right, Megan?
Yes,
Like,
yeah. So I would say, I think, unfortunately,
mhm.
we don't fully know exactly what causes this to develop. Like so many mental health disorders, there's a clearly complicated web of factors that can have a play. So there is a genetic component to OCD. It's not
Mhm.
100% genetic, but there's a component there.
Mhm.
These behaviors and rituals can certainly be reinforced by a caregiver. So if you have someone growing up who, like a parent, really instills perfectionism, a need to
Yeah.
be in constant control, difficulties with managing and accepting uncertainty, these things can definitely be a lot more likely to develop.
Mhm.
In fact, some parents often have undiagnosed OCD and bring those same exact fears into play with their
Mhm.
children, right? That, like, oh, but no, this isn't clean enough. You have to kind of follow these specific steps, which are likely to then be repeated.
Mhm.
I will say trauma, of course, like anything, it's one of those factors that makes you more likely to, of course, struggle with any sort of mental health condition, but it's not particularly tied to OCD. Um, Many people with OCD, of course, have trauma. Some of it is related to the theme they struggle with. A lot of times it's not necessarily related. So it's one of those things where you don't have to have any sort of sexual trauma to have a sexually themed OCD. You don't have to
Mhm.
have religious trauma or have any, church hurt to have any sort of moral or scrupulosity OCD. So, yes, can you have it? Absolutely. And I think it can play into the fear, right? Where not only is it the specific fear of, oh, I could do this and go to hell, but it also can involve a lot of like personal guilt or shame that might have been involved in a previous trauma, which then can even make that harder to overcome a specific fear. But there isn't a one-to-one necessarily. So that is a misconception I think a lot of people have. Even is I get a lot of clients who come to me saying, like, oh, I have like a very specific sexual trauma, or this particular thing happened. Is this what gave me OCD? And if I get
Mhm.
rid of the trauma, or if I treat it, will I not have this theme? And the answer often is it can certainly play into it, without a doubt. Even if it's something you feel very activated in, where you're getting consistent symptoms, sure, it's probably playing a role in how you feel towards it, but it's unlikely to be the exact cause.
Right.
Which is what happens is OCD just goes towards things you care about.
Yeah.
Now, if you had a trauma, if you have a sexual trauma, you probably really care about justice. You probably really care about bodily autonomy, and you really
Mhm.
care about not causing that same type of harm to another person because of
Mhm.
how important it was for you and how hard it might have been to recover.
Right.
That might make OCD care about it more and give you those types of thoughts. But
Right.
it's not necessarily related to, because I experienced this, now my OCD theme is there. It's usually more tied into things I put a lot of personal meaning to, are
Mhm.
things OCD is likely to attack, because OCD's whole goal is kind of to get a response. Right? It wants you to perform a compulsion. A compulsion is kind of the food, the fuel that keeps the OCD fire going. Without compulsions, OCD actually falls apart as a disorder. So it's very cyclical. If you can break that cycle,
Right.
it's to fall apart. The obsessions, the intrusive thoughts fade on their own
Mhm.
if we don't feed them in this exact loop. So OCD's job is almost a metaphor I like is, like those clickbait news articles.
Oh gosh. Yes.
There,
Fake it
doctor
everywhere.
discovers cure for liver cancer.
Yes.
Big medicine doesn't want you to know.
Yes.
Terrible thing happened in your town. That's
Mhm.
kind of OCD's job. It is a clickbait news article generator, and
Right.
it needs you to click on it, which is to do a compulsion, to give it attention. And so to do that, it's in your brain. It has access to everything you've been through and everything you value.
Mm.
It is not going to pick something you barely care about because you won't do anything about it.
Mm-hmm.
right? If you know
Yeah.
you don't care, or like that doesn't feel true to me, that doesn't feel fake, that's not something I'm concerned about, you're unlikely to do a compulsion. And so that thought fades. Now, when it picks on something that you have a lot of emotional response towards, we are much more likely to engage in a compulsion, right? And so I do think that to me is how I often see trauma does impact OCD, because things that you went through are a big part of your story and
Yeah.
you often really care about it, right?
Yeah.
It affects our morals deeply, which is we've been through that. We have so much empathy for other people and not wanting to repeat those cycles of harm. So OCD is going to gravitate towards that
Mm-hmm.
because you care so much, you will have a stronger response to it. If you have a stronger
Right.
response, you probably feel like you're going to have to do more compulsions. And so
Yeah.
it definitely targets your values.
Yeah.
Trauma just happens to be one of those things that, of course, like can have an impact on our values because it's part of our personal narrative and story.
Right.
But
Yeah.
treating a trauma does not necessarily cause the OCD theme to go
Mm-hmm.
away. It can make
Okay.
it less intense because obviously you have less activation, less guilt, less shame,
Right.
but it doesn't on its own cause the intrusive thoughts to actually fade. You still have to take that additional step of OCD treatment, whether formal or informal, which is
Mm-hmm.
to stop engaging in compulsions towards the thought.
And that's hard because like whatever fires together wires together in the
Yeah.
brain. So this is what's happening in the brain. We got to get people to understand like, oh, okay, like it is something that, has gave you comfort, and I think of like back in the day before I knew all this, I had a lot of superstitions. Like, and that was part of like, oh, I got to do A, B, and C in order to make sure I don't go to hell. Let's give you an
Yeah.
example or something
Yeah.
like that, right? And it's like this, and so having to face the fear, the false evidence appearing real. I want to know about exposure and response prevention therapy. I really have not done a deep dive, and that's why you're here. So I can you explain that a little more and how it does help OCD?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, exposure response prevention is basically just a form of exposure therapy specifically for OCD. So, it's really not that dissimilar from typical exposure therapy you would see for phobias, for social anxiety, for all sorts of other stuff. The big difference is that not only are you doing exposures, which is just any act that is going to elicit some distress. In OCD, that distress is tied to intrusive thoughts. So, more than likely, it's an act that is eliciting intrusive thoughts. And the big part is that you are doing response prevention, which is just a fancy way of saying don't do compulsions. So the goal,
But I can't help it.
yeah, I
Megan,
know.
I can't help it. What do I do?
Yep. So the goal of it is every ERP exercise is trying to elicit some amount of distress and then practice resisting engaging in the compulsion. So what that actually looks like is usually we build a hierarchy. We don't start with super intense fears and big things that you're terrified of. We take your theme, we break down your triggers, and we figure out what are some different ways we could elicit some of this fear, usually starting very mildly, so that we can practice resisting fixing it with the compulsion. And that way, you're actually able to see what happens as a result. So you get new learning. Now, that's the same principle of traditional exposure therapy, which is hey, I'm doing something. And in an OCD mind, the compulsion fixes it, right? So to someone
Mhm.
with OCD, the reason you are constantly exposed to intrusive thoughts but don't improve is the fact that to the brain, in OCD logic, the fact that this thought came up
Mhm.
but nothing happened, and of course they were still safe, doesn't feel safe because in their mind
Right.
they interpret it as the only reason I was safe was because I did the compulsion, right? So I had the thought of like, I don't know, just, a random sexual thought. But because I did the sign of the cross 3 times, that's showing to God that I actually like disagree with that and that that's not my morals, which means that's why I'm not going to go to hell and that's why it's okay,
Mhm.
right? So even though, of course, we know from someone outside of it that whether you did the sign of the cross or not, that thought probably would have faded and the same thing's going to happen to you. To someone with OCD, the compulsion is read as the reason these bad things aren't happening. And so it's
Mhm.
very important with exposure response prevention. We are trying to do some of these things and either reducing, delaying, or not doing the compulsion, and then allowing them to get the naturalistic learning of what actually occurs. right? So
Okay.
let's say instead it's, okay, we're going to let that thought pop up, but this time let's practice. Let's do the sign of the cross once instead of three, right? Like three feels extra safe. Let's just do it once and see what actually happens,
Hmm.
right? Because
Are
really,
you there with the
yes,
client with the okay, I'm just trying to picture this too, like with you know how you were talking about the social phobia that you had, and you said you went through exposure and response prevention, right?
yes.
So my thinking is like, did someone go and say, okay, now you're going to go outside and talk to one person? Or how did
Yes,
that
you
work?
can. You
I want to
absolutely.
do the religious, the scrupulosity kind
Mm,
of like challenging that too. But I also want people that have no idea about, they're not Christian or whatever, that they're feeling that. So, because that's a thing that I see a lot, the social anxiety
yes,
because of
yes. Okay.
COVID, like
Really intense. Yes.
that has been intense now
Yes.
for a long time, for 6 years, and that developed in the brain of like, oh my gosh, I'm sure because you're probably, because I don't, I will refer people to you, but I'm sure you're probably seeing the like the cleanliness one and then the social one like full force nowadays more than ever
Oh yeah.
because of what
Yeah, no,
happened.
after COVID, that's what I said. It caught me into OCD because it was so much agoraphobia again, because people were like, oh,
Yeah.
I got so used to not having to go out or
So how do
see.
you help someone that has that like that?
So for like agoraphobia specifically, it
Yeah.
is the same concept. We're doing the same thing of building a hierarchy. And
Mm-hmm.
personally, I do it together. I will say that varies clinician by clinician. Some
Okay.
people prefer to do it in this way, where it's like, I'm just telling you what the exposure should be. We're coming up with a plan. You're doing it
Okay.
on your own, and then you come back and tell me.
Okay.
I prefer to do it at least the first time you practice it, whatever the new exercise we're doing is. So let's say exposure is, and again, this sounds small, but is often one of the first exposures for agoraphobia. We're walking to the mailbox and back by
Wow.
yourself. Don't,
Okay.
you're not bringing a friend. You're not bringing any safety things with you. Don't bring your like anxiety medication. We're just kind of going for the walk, staying
Hmm.
there, going back slowly. So
And do you talk about what happened, the feelings and the emotions that came up for the person? Or like, I'm just curious about like how, like, all right, that's that first step. Now they come back. Are you going, okay, what's going on in your body? Are they breathing heavy? Are they thinking like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna die now because I didn't do A, B, and C? Like, how else?
yes, the whole time we're kind of like just allowing them to almost think out loud.
Okay.
Um, I will say the role of a therapist in that type of exercise is a lot of just kind of a little bit of encouragement before we get started,
Mm-hmm.
allowing them to be aware of
Mm-hmm.
these are thoughts or sensations that come up as I do it, but
Mm-hmm.
kind of reminding them. Like my role is almost to help remind them of the process, which is just because it's there doesn't mean we need to read meaning into it, right? Which is I feel anxious. My brain wants to say that means I'm going to have a panic attack, which means all my
Right.
neighbors are going to see me, which means I'm going to be an embarrassment in my community.
Uh-huh.
Let's just try to stick with the actual sensation, right? Which is you're noticing shortness of breath, tightness in your chest, and nervousness.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of ruminating about it, which is to assign all this meaning and think about what's going to happen, let's practice just staying present in your body, not fixing it. So, a lot of exposure therapy is a little counter to what a lot of people traditionally learn for more typical anxiety, which is like deep breathing, do your progressive muscle relaxation, do all these
Yeah.
coping techniques. But the issue with this is, well, you can't do those 24/7.
Right.
It's not really healthy. And at its core, these are things you're going to learn to get used to and really don't need to cope with.
Hmm. And then those become
Yes,
compulsions.
they become a compulsion. They become in agoraphobia, we call them safety behaviors, but they are
Mm,
essentially also compulsions. They are incredibly similar. So you'll see a lot of similarities between
okay.
OCD, phobias, and things like that. So yeah, the goal is I don't need to reassure myself it's all going to be okay. Nothing bad will happen. Just stay present, notice what's there, but we're practicing kind of avoiding the habit or compulsion or safety behavior of reading into it and trying to fix it right away. Because typically,
Mm,
someone with OCD or any kind of social phobia is really mentally trying to do all of these big things to feel safer. Again,
mm,
sounds simple because it's to the mailbox and back, but to them, they might be going into their head, needing to come up with a strategy of like, if I had a panic attack right now, what would I do? Where
yeah.
would I go?
What if this
How
happened?
fast
What
can
if
I
that
escape?
happened? Yeah.
Yeah, they're doing the what if dance, I
Mm-hmm.
like to call it.
Yeah.
So my goal is to help them be aware of that and
Mm-hmm.
kind of continually reconnect back to the body of nope. or not. Let's try
Yeah.
not to this. We don't know if it'll work, right? Like you don't know if
Right.
that strategy would work. Let's more focus on what's actually in front of you. Stay present, stay focused on you're walking, you're
Yeah.
seeing your neighbor, you're getting
Right.
the mail, you're coming back. And once the exposure is done, we're processing that new learning. So
Okay.
really kind of showing them, hey, yes, you had these anxiety sensations. Were they actually dangerous? Because that's the big
Yeah.
fear of both
It's the
a
challenging of the
lot
thoughts
of this, right?
and
Is
rewiring the brain.
rewiring the brain because my brain
Yeah.
screams, you can't feel this way and be
Yeah.
okay. The reality, of course, is you can do things anxious. It's not
Hmm.
dangerous. It's
Hmm.
uncomfortable, yes,
Yeah.
but it's not dangerous. So even if I
Right.
did get panicky, even if I had a mini panic attack while I was getting the mail, the new learning is to kind of process through, but you were still able to do it.
Yeah.
You're still
Yeah.
able to do it.
And you
And
had the accountability and the encouragement of another human telling you and witnessing, because
yeah,
that's what I'm hearing is that you witness the new rewiring and make them understand that they can do it. Because so many people get so stuck and feel so alone that they think this is the only way or there's no hope for them. And I have to tell you, there's always hope. There is always hope. So, on that note, I want to know, is there any practical tools, books, or resources that could help anyone that's listening right now that's like, hey, that sounds like me and I need help. And, I don't live in any of the states Megan, Megan can practice in.
absolutely. So, big resource I would say for anyone who's kind of struggling with this type of thing is you can find an OCD specialist. If you're not in one of the states I'm in, the International OCD Foundation has a
Hmm.
website and they have a great locator tool. So you
Okay.
can plug in your zip code and it's international, and
Hmm.
you can find people who basically are a member of the International OCD Foundation. They are
Okay.
going to list their specialties as well as the way they treat OCD. So they're going to kind of list all that information there. And it's a great resource to be able to help you find these specialists. Of course, you
Okay.
can use traditional methods like Psychology Today and search and plug in. I'm looking for someone who does OCD and ERP and XYZ and do it that way. But
Hmm.
I find that that's a great website. I'm on it, but many OCD specialists are members of this organization and are listed on there. It's also a great way to find support groups. So especially if therapy is just financially or time wise, or there's no one near you who can offer it, it also helps connect you with support groups, many which
Hmm.
are peer led and free, and that
Okay.
you're able to join and get access to. So that's a great resource for finding a provider. In terms of information, I will say exposure therapy actually has a lot of free information out there, which is the great part is because it's so well known, it's been around for decades and it's actually very commonly used because it's used for every phobia. There's a lot
Hmm.
of basic resources out there that are free and can kind of guide you through the basic process of things like creating a hierarchy, testing things out, and seeing what happens. I
Hmm.
will say it definitely helps to work with a specialist because the treatment is simple in theory,
Yeah.
very hard in application.
Yeah.
So actually, like brainstorming your exposures, being able to have someone be there to support you through them, but then also
Yeah.
really help you process through, your new learning, or to be able to help troubleshoot with like, why didn't this one work, right?
Right.
Because a lot of times people are not aware of just the amount of safety behaviors or compulsions they're doing, and so that
Hmm.
creates a big issue. Is if you're doing these exposures but doing a bunch of compulsions, they're not nearly as effective, and people can stay stuck for a while. So I
Yeah.
do think it's still really useful to work with someone through it, whether
Hmm.
they're a mental health professional, even like a coach who does ERP, like having second sets of eyes sometimes on what's going on can be really useful. And we all need a bit of encouragement sometimes. There's also
Yeah.
a lot of pretty low cost because, again, a lot of this information has been around for so long, right? Like, this is not a brand new manual. There's no one who really has the copyright on the treatment
Okay.
style. There's a lot of resources out there. So, even things like workbooks are pretty accessible and low cost and tend to contain at least the basic principles of ERP if you're trying to do
Hmm.
it in a self-guided way. So one
Hmm.
that I will refer clients to, although I do have my own workbook too, that sometimes I'll
Oh, you
say
do?
different one. Yes.
Right. I mean, do you have a workbook for sale
Yes, yeah, I came out with it this year.
on
So
your
I do have
website?
an OCD workbook. Yes, it's on my website.
Okay,
I
that's
can
all we need to plug in.
the link. Okay, yes, recommend mine, but I will say there's so many out there, and
Yeah.
again, it's not necessarily, it's not brand new, it's not unheard of.
Hmm.
ERP is pretty out there, although, like, again, I think there's not enough. clinicians and all of us kind of know about
No,
diagnosing it and putting it out there,
yeah.
there are
This is why you're
matter
here. Like, I'm like,
lots of resources. Yeah,
here's
so that's the good
another
part.
modality. And it's beautiful though, because listen, this is the thing. Like human beings we're so alike, but we're so complex too. We're so
Yes.
different, but alike. I don't even know how to explain that. Like, we all have blood and bones and nerves and brains and stuff like that. But then we all very uniquely made. That's why we have
Yes.
thumbprints. And so it's for you to not give up and find the help that you actually need and understand, like, you are basically responsible for yourself. So it's like, the witnessing of a therapist, this is what I like to call it, because some people come in thinking like I'm giving them advice, I'm telling them what to do. No, I have modalities. You're with yourself 24/7. You really know who you are. Sometimes people are like, no, I don't know. And I'm like, that's because you've been listening to this world too much. And now we got to get you to a point of like understanding what is happening so you can function. We are all meant to function in a healthy manner in this world. We
Yes.
are, Megan. So where can someone find you?
So probably my website is going to be the best bet. I am in the Fort Lauderdale area, so if anyone's around, they can they can find me that way.
Yeah.
But my website is stillmindpsychology.com.
Hmm.
I'm also on the IOCDF website, so you can also kind of search my name. Luckily, I guess there's not that many Macon Chromies out there, so I'm pretty up there on the search results.
Okay.
But yeah, you can reach out to me that way.
And
I do
and
provide.
what's the age group that you work with?
So I typically work with teenagers and up. If
Okay.
it's in person, usually I'm able to work with people that are a little younger who benefit from it. And then virtually, usually I work with like 15 up.
Okay. That's good to know. So I'll have all that in the show notes. Is there anything you want to say to the audience before we say goodbye?
I just hope if this is something you relate to, one of the biggest things, which I probably didn't stress enough, is that OCD and phobias are highly treatable conditions.
Mm,
While, yes, we cannot eliminate intrusive thoughts because they're part of the human condition, the actual act of obsessing about it, so really struggling with them and needing to perform compulsions, is really treatable. So, a lot of people are able to essentially make full recoveries from
mm,
OCD. It's not something that people have to live with fully in that way forever, but lack of kind of like getting treatment and taking those first steps keeps people stuck oftentimes for years. So, if some of these things we mentioned, hopefully, if you feel like you relate to it in some way, I really recommend taking those steps to get help in some way. Because a lot of times, what people maybe assume is anxiety that they're just going to have to live with for the rest of their life
right.
ends up being this incredibly treatable condition. And a lot of people are able to get their life pretty much fully back. Yes, you may still always have to deal with the occasional rare intrusive thought every week or two,
Yeah.
but actually struggling and living with OCD and just the absolute horror it can be because it
Yeah.
can be so debilitating.
Hmm.
It is very treatable for the majority of people. So
Love
that's
that.
one thing I would just instill hope and really say if you feel like any of these compulsions or things are pieces you're struggling with, really worth going out and like seeing someone, getting assessed, seeing if that's something that's happening and looking into what treatment options you do have because
Yes.
ERP does work tremendously well. Of course, we can't guarantee anything as mental health
No.
therapists,
Right.
but a lot of people are able to make pretty much full recoveries, but to be honest, one of the saddest things I have seen is that so many people have been living with this for decades before
Yeah.
they
To get
talk to
help.
me, before
Right.
they get help, before they actually realize, wow, I have these other tools and I don't have to like do this compulsive response. I can actually just let these thoughts be here and get my freedom back. But
Right.
that's one of the more heartbreaking things is a lot of times they've
Suffered for a long
they've
time.
suffered for so long or they've
Well,
seen
that's because of the stigma on mental health.
anxiety.
The
Yeah.
second you try to, and this is why this show exists, because I'm trying to break stigma in churches and in my
Yeah.
people's community, the Black Indigenous people of color community, and for everybody, honestly.
Yes.
But you know what I mean? There's so much stigma going on. The second you're like, I have this thought, oh, you're crazy. Oh, you're crazy. I mean, I don't know how many times I heard that, and now I just like go, okay, yeah, I'm crazy. What you gonna do about it? I'm just kidding.
Yes, I think it's so important to break the stigma because,
Yeah.
especially culturally, there's a lot of negative stigma with intrusive thoughts, and that
Yes.
just
It's
keeps
scary.
people
It's scary when you have
it's
like really
terrifying.
like of hurting yourself, of religious going to hell, of like trying to like sexually doing something like,
Yeah.
and you're stuck in that, and then you feel like you're alone, and then people think the only way out is to hurt themselves, and then that, and we didn't even get to the other stuff that I was going to ask you, but listen, I will leave all the information resources we talked about in the show notes. If you are listening to this and you need help, please reach out to what the links in the show notes and stuff. And then, can you name the states again that you practice in?
Yes, yeah. Florida, Texas, Vermont, Idaho, and South Carolina.
All right, you heard that. So any of you in those states, please reach out to Megan, and if not, to the International OCD Foundation. Is that what you
Yep,
said?
yep, you
For
got it.
foundation, that'll be in the show notes too. And I just want you to understand, like, there is help out there. So please go get it. And if you don't have this, please have some compassion and understanding, because you never know what another human being is going through. Okay. And do not forget to trust in the Lord, guard your heart, and renew your mind. Bye. And now for the disclaimer to make sure you understand that you are responsible for you. The content provided on the Holistic Counselor podcast is for entertainment and informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified mental health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical or mental condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. The views expressed on this podcast are my personal opinions and do not represent the views of any professional organizations with which I am affiliated. Call your doctor, 911, or 988 immediately if you have a medical emergency. The Holistic Counselor podcast does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, physicians, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned on the podcast. Reliance on any information provided by the Holistic Counselor podcast, guests appearing on the podcast at the invitation of the Holistic Counselor podcast, or other listeners to the podcast is solely at your own risk. Confidentiality notice. If you engage with the Holistic Counselor podcast by commenting or posting and are a client, please be aware that you may be revealing information that could compromise your confidentiality. Please remember that disclosing your identity or personal details can be linked to your clinical material. As a therapist, I am bound by confidentiality and will not respond to any disclosures of this type on this podcast. I am committed to upholding the ethics and confidentiality of the therapeutic relationship, which extends to all forms of communication in accordance with the laws and professional guidelines that govern mental health professionals. I want you to know that your privacy is of utmost importance, and you are responsible for protecting it when interacting on this platform or any other public forum. Thank you.